Hello and welcome to another marvelous video. I'm your host Will. The wide world of Stephen King encompasses more than just books. There's also movies and TV shows. And in this video, we're gonna get into the facts on the Tommyknockers miniseries and why it deserves a reboot. Let's get to it. The Tommyknockers was first published in 1987, and the fact remains that this was a period, this and the 70s, when King was producing some really good pieces of literature. But during the late 80s, our horror writer was suffering from a serious coke addiction. But that did not mean that King stopped writing. He kept on, and that's the kind of circumstance under which Tommyknockers was born. And while King himself called the novel awful, a few, like me, and those who adapted it into a miniseries in 1993, felt differently. But the thing is, the production went through several major problems, which ultimately led to its poor quality. There was talk of a Tommyknockers movie, with James Wan involved, but even that moved nowhere. And now, with projects like Apple TV's Neuromancer, it seems like a good time to revisit Tommyknockers and explore the major reasons why it should most definitely get a remake. And that's exactly what we're gonna do in this video. So let's begin, shall we? The aliens were designed by ballet dancers and slender women to achieve slim yet graceful extraterrestrials. It is only when you look back at Tommyknockers and revisit it with a degree of seriousness that you realize why the story still begs for, or rather deserves, a modern reboot. The craft behind it was far more ambitious than people remember, especially in how the aliens were conceived and brought to life. These were not rubber suit invaders built to scare you through just bulk or aggression. The goal here was achieving some elegance, albeit through fear. And that's why they cast ex-ballet dancer Karen Malkus as the lead hero alien, and used other slender women and dancers to perform the creature roles. The effects team wanted extraterrestrials that felt uncanny, almost beautiful, which explains why slender women and ballet dancers formed the physical base for the creatures. This made the aliens more fluid, and it also gave the women in the suit more control, which in turn continues to make the aliens look unusual, in a good way, even today. The visual design is a bit about organic shapes. Australian production designer Bernard Hydes pushed for technology that looked grown rather than built, and likewise, metal was not used to build a spaceship, and all its machinery looked somewhat like a wasp nest or a massive plant that was still blooming. Furthermore, microscopic plant photography guided the textures, which helped sell the idea that this thing did not belong to any logic that arose from human engineering. And if you think about it, this separates the Tommyknockers from most alien stories of its era. The alien work itself came from Alterian Inc., under the supervision of Tony Gardner, with a team that included Pennekes, Hartwell, Lauren Githens, Chet Zar, and Bill Surgeon. Their brief aimed for a slim yet graceful look that TV aliens rarely attempted at the time. The final designs turned out to be tall, silver-blue figures with reptile-style heads, oversized rib cages, and sharp black nails. 4 full alien suits existed, with one hero version, the one brought to life by Miss Karen, built for close work. That hero alien even used extended leg rigs for height in select shots, which added to the unsettling proportions. The director was fired after just 2 days of filming, and the entire production had to be relocated to New Zealand. The production of the Tommyknockers turned into a logistical mess almost right out of the gate. And honestly, I'm amazed it even made it to air. ABC had gotten the schedule fixed pretty early, with filming required to start in or after October of 1992, and the entire miniseries finished by May 1993. That's hardly over half a year. And this tight window was gonna become a problem. The story takes place in summer, in a very American New England style setting, which immediately ruled out shooting in the United States during that period. The solution was New Zealand, chosen largely because parts of it could pass for rural New England on camera. Then, just 2 days into filming, director Louis Teague was fired. Publicly, his camp said he worked too slowly. From the production side, executive producer Frank Koenigsberg argued that Teague's approach did not fit the limits of a network miniseries. Either way, losing a director that early forced a complete reset while the clock kept ticking. And not just this, getting a new guy would mean that there was gonna be a complete tonal shift. Shooting in New Zealand was another issue altogether. The crew was around 200 people large, many of them local hires without much experience on a project of this scale. At the same time, equipment, materials, and support staff had to travel long distances, deal with customs, and eat into an already stretched budget. Additionally, effects-related woes were not alien to the project either. Alien designers Brian Pennicus and Vance Hardwell needed to ship roughly 180 pounds of flammable chemicals from the United States. Customs officials in Singapore panicked and sent the shipment back. Needless to say, a workaround had to be thought of, and as a result, they repackaged the chemicals with tree sap and bark to make them seem less threatening. Even then, the materials arrived only during the final days of filming. I mean, looking at this, it would not be entirely wrong to call the production a survival spree instead of a plan. That the miniseries exists at all says everything about how stubborn this project had to be just to reach the finish line. The script for Part 2 wasn't even finished when filming was halfway complete. By the time the Tommyknockers finished filming halfway, the production had somehow found a new way to make things harder. It was almost as if someone was looking for reasons to make things more difficult. So what happened? Well, the script for Part 2 had not even been written in finished form. Filming moved forward anyway, with pages rewritten late and decisions made on the fly. And by this point, the cast and crew just wanted to get the series finished beyond anything else. And in the end, what really saved the project was not planning, but teamwork. Cast and crew pulled together, added weekend shoots, and pushed hard enough to keep the production within the 60-day post-production deadline back in the United States. Locations did a lot of heavy lifting. Exterior material came from Puhoi, a small and quiet country town that fit the tone of the show without much alteration. Interior work happened inside Auckland warehouses, which doubled as key sets, including the spaceship interior. It was practical, quick, and definitely far from glamorous. But it worked. Some scenes required creative problem solving. A fight between Gardner and an alien had to be filmed in pieces, with Jimmy Smits and the creature shot at different times and later combined. That approach helped manage scheduling pressure and effects limitations, even if it added more work later. Stephen King himself called his own novel an awful book. Stephen King has never been shy about his own misfires. But The Tommyknockers is probably the epitome of Stephen King's self-loathed pieces of work. He wrote the novel in 1987, while he was in the middle of a pretty heavy cocaine addiction, and years later, he flat out called it an awful book. Yes, awful. He openly admitted the drug shaped both the excess and the mess, though he also said there was a strong story buried underneath the noise, one he still feels tempted to revisit someday. Whether he will or not is a completely different matter altogether. This explains why this book feels the way it does. It also explains why King showed little affection for the miniseries adaptation, and, in rare form, seemed to discourage people from engaging with it at all. That said, dismissing the Tommyknockers outright is not really fair, at least according to me. It is strange, bloated, and frequently absurd, but it is also magnetic in a way only King can manage. The premise of the book is strong enough to hook you in quickly. Bobby Anderson stumbles across a buried alien ship in the woods behind her home, and this discovery poisons the town of Haven from the ground up. Jim Gardner, a suicidal poet and recovering alcoholic, senses that Bobby needs help and heads toward Haven as a last act before ending his life. This whole setup may sound simple, almost familiar, because it is those two things, but the execution is what works best here. This is not a run-of-the-mill alien invasion story. It is a paranoid spiral filled with ideas that feel pulled straight from a fevered mind. So you have a soda machine that turns lethal, a dog that gets locked in a shed and used as a living power source. King spends pages describing hangovers with such raw detail that I had to pause and reassess my own love-hate relationship with booze. These moments do not always serve the plot, but they do serve the mood. The book feels sick, restless, and overcharged, which tracks perfectly with where King was at the time. Having said that, structure might be another problem, despite, as I said, good execution. So the story opens with Bobby, then shifts focus to Gardner, then explodes outward into the lives of dozens of Haven residents. The cast grows so large that names blur together, and you end up feeling like you're watching the first season of Game of Thrones, where half the time you're struggling to remember everyone's names. By the final stretch, I often stop to remind myself who certain characters even were, and this dilution, for lack of a better word, hurts the emotional payoff, especially when the story asks us to care about people we barely know. King also dives into self-reference. Firestarter, The Dead Zone, It, and Pet Sematary all get direct references. I usually enjoy his shared universe, but here it feels excessive, almost desperate, as though the book keeps nudging you and asking for validation. And yet, despite all that, I tore through its 558 pages in about 3 weeks. I cared about Gardner. I wanted to know how it ended. I remembered fragments from childhood, but not the full shape, and that pull stayed strong to the final page. This is not a novel I would hand to a newcomer, but for longtime readers, The Tommyknockers is a time capsule of King in the late 80s. Flaws exposed and imagination unrestrained. It is a terrible, fascinating masterpiece of sci-fi horror, but it is absolutely worth your time. The novel was Stephen King's second best-selling hardcover release, despite being called his worst work. There is a strange thing about The Tommyknockers. Stephen King has called it his worst book, written at a time when his life and habits spiraled. Yet the numbers tell a very different story. When it hit shelves in 1987, it became his second best-selling hardcover release ever. It even outsold It, The Shining, and Carrie. For a novel its own author openly disavowed, that kind of commercial muscle still feels unheard of. There were talks of a new Tommyknockers film adaptation, with James Wan attached, alongside Roy Lee, who produced the 2017 It Chapter 1, and Larry Sinitsky, who executive produced the 1993 TV miniseries. Sinitsky described the book as an allegory of addiction, written while King battled his own demons, but also as a story about nuclear fear, mass hysteria, and technology spiraling beyond control. Strip away the excess and the odd detours, and those themes remain uncomfortably current. At its core, the book tracks how a strange gas leaking from a buried spacecraft poisons a small American town, not only physically, but also mentally, turning progress into obsession and community into something brittle. I think this very tension explains the book's strong willpower to just stay in conversation every few years. The main alien required a custom head model created from Marg Helgenberger's face. One of the strangest things about the production was probably what they did with Marg Helgenberger. A secondary alien head sculpt took direct inspiration from her features and appeared during Bobby's transformation into a Tommyknocker. This ultimately made the body horror feel more real and scary, since the alien form felt disturbingly personal and not at all abstract. New Zealand effects artist Richard Taylor and his team built Neanderthal skeletons that filled the frame through blue screen work, along with a mechanical version of Petey the dog. Plans once called for the dog to swim underwater, but they ultimately went for sleepwalking instead, which fit the tone better. Why a reboot actually makes perfect sense. A reboot of the Tommyknockers, in my opinion, would be more than a simple attempt to bank on nostalgia and milk it like so many studios do with their cash cow IPs. The 93 miniseries never really had a fair shot. Budget limits, rushed schedules, behind the scenes and Kiwi problems, and early 90s television effects clipped the show's wings before it could fully take off. What survived was the outline of a strong idea, not the full idea that the book tried to sell. Now, with time and better tools on our side, the story might be something that could be looked into. For instance, take the novel called Neuromancer by William Gibson. Although it was celebrated as one of the best sci-fi novels that even gave terms like cyberspace, it is only now that Apple TV is adapting it into live action. The reason is simple. In today's time, we have the necessary tools. Think about it. Do you think Avatar would have looked as good as it does today had it been made in the 90s? Of course not. Anyway, at its core, The Tommyknockers is not a simple alien invasion story. When Bobby Anderson uncovers a buried spacecraft near Haven, Maine, the threat comes from the transformation of regular human beings into their stranger selves. The invisible gas seeps into the town and turns people into something smarter but emptier, inventive without wisdom, and productive without restraint. Stephen King wrote the novel during a period of heavy substance abuse, and later called it an awful book, though he admitted there was a good one buried inside it. But I see this as something neutral or inconsequential to the story, if not a positive trait. Let me explain. So I, for one, believe that addiction runs through the story like a pulse. The town cannot walk away. The influence locks people in place, sharpens obsession, and erases identity. Bobby herself uses fear and authority to control the initially suicidal Jim Gardner before he realizes the sickness applies to the aliens too. Power corrupts, even when it arrives wrapped as progress. The book also wrestles with nuclear anxiety and radiation imagery. Gardner fixates on atomic carelessness, and the physical changes in the townspeople mirror exposure and decay. A modern reboot could finally trim the excess King himself wanted gone, focus the story arcs and subplots that make the whole stronger, and let the themes breathe. With today's effects, The slow loss of self, the moral rot, and the eerie genius of Haven could feel intimate instead of awkward. This is one of those rare cases where revision does not erase history, it finishes the job. So yeah, that was all in this one. And if you liked the video, do consider hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Those 2 small clicks from you will help us tremendously in bringing you more of these marvelous videos.